1-0.
Greetings, fellow barbarians. It is I, once again, Alan Odinson, and you are listening to the Barbarian Lounge. Be sure to check us out on Facebook. Give us a like there. Follow the Barbarian Lounge podcast on Facebook. We try and keep a lot of different updates and stuff on there. Try to keep it interesting. Talk about some of the topics we're going to do. It's the best way to keep track of what we're doing. You can also find us on Podbean. There, the Barbarian Lounge at Podbean. I don't remember exactly what that particular thing is, but you can check us out there, subscribe, keep track of all the new stuff that we're going to be putting out. I had some people ask me about our new intro music. Where did it come from? You know, who's that on the guitar? Well, it's not me. It's actually a good friend of mine, a brother, if you will, Danny Leffridge. Danny Leffridge Guitar. You can find him on Facebook. On there, he actually provided that guitar work. Amazing guitarist. He's a good guy, all around good dude. He's always putting out different stuff. So check him out. You know, he's always got new things. He's always trying all this different stuff. Give that page a like too, man. He's excellent. You like good guitar work? He's always down for some work there. He might be able to make you a tune or something. So today we're going to be talking about, this is the episode everybody's been waiting on, man. I think they thought it was going to be the first one I did, but there's a lot more to me than just this. But we're going to be talking about modern combat archery. It's a term that I have coined. It's something that is exclusive to me. I started it when I was working with Aries Tactical Solutions. I started this concept of modern combat archery. Used to just call it combat archery, but I wanted to move away from that world a bit just because I didn't agree with their mentality behind things. And I'm going to talk about how the concept of modern combat archery differs from regular combat archery. But for those of you who don't know, I am the owner of Odinson Archery. I got a lot of things that I do. Odinson Archery is my primary business where we make bows and archery equipment. And we're going to be talking about some of those bows that I make there, where you're going to see some of the historical references as well as some of the modern applications of those bows. So, yeah, you can check it out there. Go to OdinsonArchery.com, OdinsonArchery.com, to find a lot of different stuff there. We have articles. There's going to be an instructional series coming out later this year. I'm working on it now. I'm kind of a perfectionist. I want to make sure everything's right before I put it out, and exactly what content I want to cover and don't want to cover, and just trying to fit all the good stuff I can on a disc for you guys. And we'll probably have a nice series that's going to slowly come out. It'll probably come out a disc at a time, but we got to get all that stuff situated. So modern combat archery, what in the world is that, right? You've probably heard of combat archery, but did I just throw a word in front? Kind of like democratic socialist. Did I just throw you throw democratic in front of socialism and make people think it's not socialism? Whatever. No, I didn't just throw modern in front of it to try and be different. There is a different mentality, different mindset behind what we do. So, what is modern combat archery? The idea behind modern combat archery was that I wanted to bring the bow back to its level of prominence that it once had. And of course it's never going to be able to compete with modern firearms on a gun versus bow scenario. But they say never bring a knife to a gunfight. Well, my idea behind that is, if you don't have your gun out and you're not pointing the gun at me, pulling the trigger and shooting me dead and stopping me, it's still a knife fight until you do all those things. And this is the idea I put behind the bow. Don't bring a bow to a gunfight, but I'm going to try and change it into a bow fight. And we'll talk about the idea and the concepts behind that a little bit later. But in combat archery, the ideas behind that basically came from historical archery, mainly in things like LARP, the live action role play, or the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism. That's quite a name. But a lot of these concepts for combat archery came from that, and it's the idea of combat archery is based on fighting another person that has a bow, or fighting against some people with handheld weapons, medieval style, if you will. But the idea for modern combat archery is basically the idea of bringing a bow to a gunfight, using the bow as a primary weapon in modern days. How can we turn this gunfight into a bow fight? These are ideas and concepts we're trying to put into play. And there's a certain mindset that has to be developed by the modern combative archer in order to really pull this off. It's not about running in there and spraying arrows everywhere like you would a gun. People try and take their bow and turn it into a gun, and it's just not. It's like trying to fight a modern war with a single shot weapon. You got one shot, you got to reload and shoot again. And there's a different mentality and different tactics that have to be used in order to do this. Another thing that we focus on is accuracy and distance shooting as opposed to speed shooting. That's this ridiculous fad of speed shooting that guys like Lars Anderson brought about. People see it, and don't get me wrong, it's really cool and it looks neat and everything, but they make the mistake of thinking that this is combatively used, even from a historical standpoint. I was one of the first guys to come out and really, say about Lars Anderson what I actually thought, that he wasn't as great as everybody thought he was. There's a lot of video editing that went into it, and he was using a child's bow. I was one of the first guys to come out and bring all of these things into perspective, as well as this idea of that you can use this lightweight bow and make it work. And a lot of people were thinking that you just take the bow and you run in there and you shoot 10 shots out of it from your hand. He can shoot 10 shots in 2-3 seconds or whatever. Well, in reality, he would be shot dead from a modern combative standpoint, or even in just a regular historical standpoint. He would have been overrun by guys with swords at those ranges. It was ridiculous. We focus on this idea of a consistent reload. It doesn't have to be fast. A consistent reload for us is usually reloading about one arrow a second to a second and a half. And the concept of moving from cover to cover, this is very realistic, because you shoot, move from cover, reload as you're moving. By the time you reach cover, usually you've reloaded by then, and you can make a second shot. And when you start talking at shooting at distances, we extensively work on shooting at distances beyond 50 yards and hitting accurately at those distances. Why do we do that? Well, if you think about it, what is the safer range to engage somebody? Is it close, or is it further away? Well, if you think about when you're talking, let's just talk about firearms for a minute. If you're talking firearms, would you rather have somebody shoot at you from 10 to 15 yards, or would you rather have them shoot at you at 70 yards? I wouldn't want to be shot at all, but if I had to pick one, I would pick 70 yards, because the odds of them hitting me are much further away. Like the distance they're at becomes increasingly difficult the further you get away to hit your target, even for an advanced shooter. So if I can use that concept of shooting at distances far away with a weapon that is completely silent, now I'm really entering this psychological battle that we're going to talk about later when we start talking about different skill sets that we work on in the world of modern combat archery. So we focus on distance work. It's a big deal. Yes, we do some close range work, but distance work from cover and concealment is a big deal. And that brings me to the next point. Stealth and camo over an overt attack. I talked about this earlier. We want to utilize the same concepts that a sniper would use. A sniper realizes what he has. He has a weapon that's designed for long range. Granted, we can't cover the same distance as, say, a .338 Lapua. We can't cover those distances. But we utilize camouflage and different methods of distraction. A little bit of theatricality goes into it. We're going to use camouflage, stealth, quiet movement, and we're going to try and hit from ranges outside of where people are going to be expecting the archer to attack from. It's not going to be this idea that we're going to run into the middle of the crowd and shoot everybody with arrows and all this stuff, and it's ridiculous. I get into this argument with guys all the time when they start talking about combat archery. They get this idea that you're going to dance around with your back quiver and you're drawing and shoot and shoot and shoot. And look, I can shoot 3 targets in 1 second. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. Did your arrow do enough to kill them? Did you hit where you're trying to aim? It doesn't matter how fast you can miss the target. I can't stress this enough. My students probably get sick of me hearing this. I run a regular archery class for some homeschool kids. It's a kind of a historical PE class where I teach them the history of archery and the tactics that were used, but we also get out there and we work on archery fundamentals and work on these tactics. So the kids get to feel what I'm teaching them. So you have to get this idea of being the ghost of the battlefield. I'll talk about this concept of a ghost of the battlefield, but you want to use stealth. You want to use camouflage. Another thing that we utilize is weapons transitions, and this does include handguns. Yes, that's right. A handgun in combat archery, that doesn't make any sense. Well, there's this idea that if you have a handgun, if you get shot with a handgun, that you just, especially if it's a 45, oh my God, you get shot with a 45, you burst into dust, and your bloodline is contaminated throughout history, and it's just this horrible thing that happens. But it's not necessarily true. Yes, a handgun can kill, handguns do kill, but statistically, dying from a handgun wound is pretty low, due to modern medicine especially. But statistically, it's a lot lower. That's why they say, if you're firing your handgun, a lot of times you're trying to fight to get to your rifle. So I've heard guys in the firearms community talk about that. But the handgun is carried mostly because it is just that. It's small, it's compact. But we use the handgun as a means. Think of it almost as, this is why I don't focus so much on speed reloading, is if I get spotted, or if I shoot that one shot and somebody sees where the arrow comes from, or they see me move or whatever, and I start taking fire, the handgun is a way for me to unleash hell as I am escaping. That is going to be my suppressive fire. I'm probably going to I'm going to fire rounds to suppress as I'm moving, pop smoke, cover my exit. These are ideas that we're going to be using, especially if you start talking about working with a team. So we utilize a lot of weapons transitions. Shoot an arrow, draw your long blade. A lot of other groups I saw just recently, the Atienza Kali group, great group of people. They were doing an event where you saw these same concepts. It's a universal concept of transitioning to another weapon, because the idea of this speed reloading, especially when you start talking a heavy draw bow you're going to need to really kill or stop a human being, you're not going to be able to do this speed reloading junk. So let's talk a little bit about the history, some of the badasses in history of archery. Not enough people pay attention to the historical roots, and I want to talk just a little bit, because when you understand this, understanding the concepts and the ideas that these guys used, this is our chance to really grasp to the spirit of archery and build upon it and see where it comes from. Once we know where this idea of a combative form of archery came from, then we can start actually building upon that and creating something new. So the first guys on the list of the badasses of historical archery, you got to talk about the Mongols, the Mongolians. They're probably some of the most widely known deadly archers in history. And it's probably because of their empire. They existed in the 13th, 14th centuries. They had the largest land empire in history. It's unbelievable. I think it originated from Central Asia, stretched to Eastern Europe, all the way over to the Sea of Japan. I think it went up to Serbia and the Arab Peninsula. It's unbelievably huge. They were known for their horse archery. And at Odinson Archery, which you can find at odinsonarchery.com, we offer a bow known as the Assassin. We have several Mongolian styles. We have the Subutai, the Bow of Men, and the Assassin is a very popular model. It's a flat black design, really, I guess, a really sexy look for a lot of people. But the Mongolian short horse bow was such a powerful weapon. It had the ability to be very damaging, especially from horseback, because it's so light, slings an arrow very, very fast. That lightweight, maneuverable design gives them the ability to shoot on all different sides of the horse. It's very mobile. You wouldn't have to worry about it getting caught on the horse. But a lot of people didn't realize that the Mongols actually used two bows. They had a short horse bow, and they had a longer bow for longer ranges. With the shorter bows, they're phenomenal for close range work. And when I say close range, I'm talking like 30 yards in. They work phenomenally for that. Your longer bows just have that ability to send the arrow so much further. They're able to store more energy. So you have, a lot of times your longer bows are more for your long range shots. And these will be your shots, 90, 100 yards, ranges such as that. But a lot of times the Mongols were using these short bows because their horse, they had that horse, so they had the ability to close distance and control the range with that horse, so they could ride in up close, fire, and keep going. So very, very dangerous style that they had. I mean, and of course they used an overt style, but this is historical archery. But they could come in, just cause havoc, hit them with these short range shots, short range kill shots, and ride out. And some people, there's a lot of talk about the Mongols using bows that were powers of 100 pounds plus for their short horse bows. I think that gets lost in translation. Even with armored opponents that they were typically running into, bows of that size were not typically utilized for the shorter bows. You would find those in the larger bows for making those long range shots, and that was basically just so it could send an arrow those distances. But most of their bows were composite style bows, so they were kind of almost put together with like a type of glue. So you had sinew and wood and bone and horn. They would use all of these things and basically kind of glue them together. But the problem they ran into is they couldn't really fight in the rain, because their bows, when they got wet, all that stuff would start coming loose, and their bows would basically start falling apart. So they ran into issue whenever they would go up against the bad weather at the time. So I think when they ran into some of the Manchu archers who used a all wood style bow, the Manchu could keep fighting in conditions that were less than favorable. But the Mongols ran into trouble. And their style of bow is still used today. Like I said, I love the Mongol-style bows. They store a lot of energy in those curves. They're nice to look at as well. So, yeah, check those out on Odinson Archery. Other badasses. I kind of lump these all together. You have the Saracens, the Assyrians, and the Arab archers. I lumped them all together. Now, some of the best manuals ever produced on the use of combative archery are written by the Arab archers, and I think it was a big deal back then. I know that they used it was the nobility shot a lot of archery, but they utilized more of an approach, not so much as the horse archers where they would ride in and attack, but they utilized more of I call it the make it rain theory. They would basically volley arrows in and just make it rain on people. It was quantity over quality was what they were going for. And this is where this speed shooting idea came in, where you wanted to send arrows as fast as you could. It's not a big deal to be super accurate when you've got 300 people all lobbing arrows at the same time. It's just basically a rain of death that they would put on people. But the Assyrians were, the people feared them, man. I mean, the Assyrians were noted for this idea of they could show up to, say, a castle or whatever, and before they lay siege, they would send an emissary there, and he would say, look, man, if you guys surrender, if all of you surrender, you walk out, you'll be treated fairly, everybody be taken care of, you can go on, no problems. But if one of you, just one, resist, we're going to kill everybody. And they won a lot of battles that way without firing a single arrow. They were very feared. Even the Bible speaks of the danger of the Arab archer. I remember seeing a verse, several verses about that when I was doing a little bit of research on the Arab archers. There's also, I hate to say it, there's also, I believe, a bit of skullduggery in the some of the feats that these guys could supposedly do. I own some of these books, the Saracen archery and the Arab archery books, and they say they make claims that that their arrow designs that can make the arrow turn corners and all this stuff like that. It's complete horseshit. I've recreated these according to the specs of the book, and they just fly ridiculous and fall to the ground. And it's silly. But there's ideas of boomerang arrows and all this stuff. It doesn't work. It's all fake. And the idea of the Arab archer and how fast the Saracen archer was kind of brought to light yet again by Lars Anderson. And when you start talking skullduggery and general fuckery, Lars Anderson's the name that comes up, all these different claims. This idea that you can, the reason they put the arrow on the right side was so they could speed reload. Not true. Not true in the least bit. The reason they had the arrow on the right side was because, say I'm a right-handed archer and I'm holding the bow in the left hand, I grab the string with my right hand. If I put an arrow on the right side and I grab it with 3 fingers and try and pull it back, the natural bend and curve of your hand as you pull that back will actually pull the arrow off to the right, so it'll fall off the rest. If you don't believe me, try it. So those guys, when they put the arrow on the right side, they were using a thumb draw. When you use a thumb draw, it actually locks the arrow in place and prevents it from falling off. The same rule applies if I put the arrow on the left side. If I put the arrow on the left side and try and grab it with a thumb draw, it'll fall off to the left because of the tension that's created by that sort of draw. If I use 3 fingers, it holds it right on there. So these are ideas that he made up to try and promote a video. Also, this idea that you could sling your hand forward made the arrow go faster, and you could use a lighter bow. And supposedly there's a lot of history where you could just sling your hand forward and make. No, I believe that was referred to. I don't know, maybe from Arab archery. I know in Turkish archery they refer to it as the kachka. I could be butchering that, so forgive me for any of you Turkish people listening. But the idea was moving the bow, because an arrow moves basically like a snake once it comes off the string. It moves like a snake around the bow itself. So when the kachka could be done by moving your hand forward and slightly outward, which would kind of in a way move the bow, the bow out of the way of the arrow as it flew. You can do it that way, or you can move it. You see the guys move their hand completely out of the way. Very difficult technique to master. I've worked with it quite a bit, but there was this idea that made it. That doesn't work. If you come to a full draw and you let it go, that's the type of power you have. These little half draws these guys were doing, it's not true. If you look at the techniques that Lars Anderson talks about, this where you fire 10 arrows as fast as you could, that whole situation, if you look in the book itself, it's under the stunt shooting in there, so it's all stunt work. It was done to impress a king. If you read the rest of the book, it actually talks about the war methods that were used, and with these heavy bows that these guys were using, they used the traditional thumb draw just like everybody else uses. I think that was one of the reasons that when I made my response video, I was one of the first guys to really lay into Lars Anderson, that it was so brutally vile, I guess you could say. I pissed a lot of people off in the combat archery world with that video, but I don't take any of it back, because a lot of the statements I made at the time have been proven by other people, by myself, and historically. So let's get away from that nut job for a second, and let's talk about the other badasses, the European longbowmen. Oh yeah, these are some of my favorite archers just because some of the stories about them. You have to understand the evolution that the longbow took in the European countries, mainly England. But you have to understand this evolution. The longbow was considered a peasant's weapon. It was a hunting weapon. It was something that you used to hunt deer. Don't shoot the king's deer, right? So it was used as something like that. It wasn't really considered a weapon of war, but the longbow began to evolve. Yes, it was used some, but it slowly began to evolve into the war bow. And the war bow was, this thing was drawn, whereas the longbows were drawn 60, 70 pounds, which I still think is a hellaciously heavy hunting weight. But these war bows, they were carved out of yew, which is a very springy wood, and these things were drawing 120, 150 plus pounds. An unbelievable amount of draw weight that these guys were pulling. So why were they using such a heavy draw weight bow? Why did they go up so heavy? Well, the answer was they had to knock through plate armor. And you're not going to really bash through plate armor with a lighter draw weight bow. That's one reason. The other reason was because of the arrow shafts they were using. The arrow shafts they were using, as opposed to your typical size arrow shaft, even the cedar arrows that we sell at Odinson Archery, they're that typical, the generic size of the arrow shaft. But these arrows shot out of these war bows were half-inch diameter arrows. Think about that, a half-inch diameter. That is a ridiculously large arrow. But they had to have this to absorb the energy so the arrow didn't snap. They had to have this to absorb the energy off of such a powerful weapon like the war bow. So these guys were launching javelins of death through the air, making it rain these javelins of death down upon their enemy. And they had several different methods they used. They had some guys that would snipe with their war bows, and they had their general archers that would just make it rain death from above. But the real moment that I think historically, and this could be argued, but one of the big moments that really solidified the English longbowmen was the Battle of Azincourt. I kind of look at it as the kind of the European version of the 300, the Battle at Thermopylae. So you've got this. Let me just lay the battle out for you here. So you've got the French versus the English. There's about 6,000 English troops. There's about 20 to 30,000 French troops there. And the French have the English kind of blocked in. They can't really go anywhere. They can't retreat. They can't go east, west. They're just kind of stuck where they're at. Well, what the French didn't realize was that of those 6,000 English troops, 5,000 of them were bowmen. 5,000 of those guys were some of the best longbowmen of the time. They didn't know this. They thought they were dealing with regular foot soldiers. And the French they had a heavy cavalry. They had their foot soldiers as well, but they had their heavy cavalry, but they weren't aware really of the terrain they were on. They weren't aware that it was this heavy clay-like terrain, very difficult for the cavalry to work through. Well, what ended up happening was the English, I guess the concept they talk about in SIOC of be the feeder, the English started feeding here. The English, rather than making it rain arrows, and I think, if I remember correctly, they said at the time they were roughly at about 300 yards. Rather than making it rain arrows, they selected their best archers, their best snipers of the battlefield. They had these guys started sending single arrows across the battlefield and started picking off and wounding and demoralizing some of the French cavalry at the back of the behind the enemy, behind the foot soldiers, behind the lines. They were at the back of the lines. They had these guys start picking them off. And to the French, this was an insult. This was a massive insult. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. Because a lot of the cavalry at the time, they were kind of the French nobility. They were the more uppity members. They weren't like the lowly foot soldiers, So they started picking these guys off, and they were harassing them with single arrows. Well, this riled the French up. And the French said, you know what? That's it. Start getting the cavalry together. Get everybody. We're going to hit a charge on them. Well, at this time, the English started moving forward. The English moved forward to about the 240, 200-yard line, somewhere in that range, set up their stakes to stop the cavalry charge, and prepared themselves for the charge that was coming. Well, like I said, They were the French were unaware of their terrain they were on. This was another thing, I think it's Sun Tzu talks about knowing your terrain before the battle, and I guess they should have read Sun Tzu, huh? They probably didn't have a French version of that at the time. So the French cavalry starts charging. Well, at this point, the English longbowmen open up on them, and they make it rain, and they cause heavy casualties. And then they start making it rain even further behind the enemy lines and picking off all the people behind the French lines. What this does is everybody starts realizing that the further they are back, the more in danger they are, so they start pushing forward. In turn, this starts pushing the foot soldiers forward and pushing them almost on top of the English lines. And the English start taking prisoners. And they gather all these prisoners, and there's a lot of little other things that happened along, in this, a lot of mistakes the French started making. But these English longbowmen were just making it rain. They were picking off, causing heavy casualties, and eventually the French surrendered. And it was all because of the danger of the English longbowmen. They had this ability to just, they had their guys that were specialists, these snipers, and they also had the ability to make it rain. And they would just keep those arrows coming. And the French, man, they developed this hatred for the English archer. A while back we put out a t-shirt with an Englishman kind of with a helmet on, and he's smirking, and he's holding the two fingers up, and it says, "Pluck you." The history behind that was that the French hated the longbowmen so bad that they would, whenever they would capture an English archer, they would cut his fingers off, cut his two fingers off. And it was just, it was to show them, you're never going to fire an arrow at us again. Well, the English figured this out, and now you start having the longbowmen, they would stick their two fingers up at them, and they would say to them, "We can still pluck the you, so pluck you." Obviously, that developed throughout the years of pluck you into the profane word. If any of my kids are listening to this, turn it real quick. 1, 2, 3. That changed to fuck you. So pluck you became fuck you. There's a lot of profanity that is developed off of the world of archery. There's another word. There's another bit of profanity that came with it. The French will refer to the English archers as those goddams with their long sticks. So that sounds like a compliment if you ask me. But the French hated the English, and in a way, the French really hated the longbow in general. They didn't use a lot of bowmen in the French army. You saw a lot of crossbows used. Why was this? It was actually out of fear of the power of the longbow. Anybody, it was a peasant's weapon. Remember, anybody could make. They could find a yew tree, get a stave of yew, carve it out, and they could make a longbow. So any peasant can make a longbow. So what happens if this weapon of war all of a sudden gets in the hands of the peasantry, and they're upset with their king or whatever ruler they have at the time? They could essentially overthrow the government with their longbows. The French were terrified of this, so they kept the idea of bows are useless for warfare, so stupid English using them. So they kept this idea of only the crossbow, because they knew the crossbow was very difficult for your average people to make. So it's funny, even throughout history, even today, we see the government not wanting people who wish to control others, not wanting to see the average citizenry have the ability to have these weapons of war. Because what happens when the citizens have weapons of war and you start shitting on them, well, they just may rise up. So the French were terrified of this, just as some of our corrupt rulers today, not going to mention any names, just as our corrupt rulers today are afraid of this very same thing. So it's very interesting. The history of archery is really the history of man. I believe it was Fred Bear that said that. So the decline of archery came, of course, with the advent of guns. And you ask yourself why, and some people say, well, it's a gun. Well, think about it at the time. If you've ever shot like a flintlock weapon, which I love flintlock pistols, that's my inner pirate coming out. Yes, we will have an episode on pirates that will be coming out, so everybody wait for that. But if you take your average person, so if you take let's take a flintlock pistol real quick, or a rifle. So what do? You load your powder, you put your ball and patch in there, pack it down in there nice and tight. Then you take your powder, you fill the pan, close it up, and you fire. Then you do the same thing again. The reloading process was very extensive. Plus, you had quite a bit of misfires at the time as well. So, why were people using that as opposed to a bow? I can shoot an arrow. At my current level, I can shoot an arrow roughly 1 arrow every second to every 2 seconds if I'm taking my time for the 2-second shot, and hit accurately with them. So why were people using guns? Well, let's look at it objectively. If I take somebody, I can take somebody and take them to the gun range today, and within an hour I can easily have them hitting the target. No problem. Even at ranges of 50 yards, I can put a rifle in their hand, and I can have them hitting it no problem. I can take those same people who've never shot a bow, put a bow in their hand, and it will take me much longer to get them hitting at 50 yards. May even take several days just to get all the fundamentals down. So it just became an ease of arming the troops. I can take those people and, as I say, okay, we're going to load the gun, you're going to line these sights up, pull the trigger, it goes bang, then you load it again. That's all they had to know. There's a lot of things that go into archery, especially when you start talking about making long-range shots. So it was just an ease to line everybody up and have them fire their muskets. So it was just easier to train the troops. Now, of course, in modern days now with modern firearms, there's a lot of different things, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I'm telling you that if I had the choice of going into a fight with a bow or a gun, that I'm going to pick the bow over the gun. That's not the case. I may use the bow to supplement the gun, but when it comes to most instances, your firearm is going to be superior in a gunfight. But we're going to talk about some concepts here that possibly will change the parameters of the battle and turn it into a bow fight. But first, I want to talk about some of the modern applications of people who have used archery even in modern days. You don't hear about a lot of these people, but they definitely deserve recognition. So when we start talking about the modern guys, the modern users of archery, you can't talk about that without talking about Mad Jack. The Mad Jack Churchill from World War II. I'm sure you guys have seen pictures of this dude. You see pictures of him getting off of a carrier onto the shore. I don't know which battle it was, but you see all these guys armed with rifles, and you see this guy standing with a sword and a bow. That's Mad Jack. Mad Jack would go into battle with a bow and a basket hilt Scottish broadsword and wearing a kilt. This was how he went into battle, and the guy survived the war. Yes, he lived to be like 89. He survived. I think he was shot, blown up. He had all these horrible things happen to him, but Mad Jack, still, he always showed up with those weapons. And he actually holds the record for the last known longbow kill in battle. He shot a German NCO in 1940 at the Battle of France. He shot him with the longbow, killed him dead, one shot. So, yeah, in a world where everyone else was using guns, you had to be a little mad to go into battle with a bow, and Mad Jack was the guy that did that. Amazing story. I always tell people about Mad Jack. That's the mentality of the combat art, the modern combat archer, which we're going to talk about that a little bit later. In Vietnam, a lot of people don't realize in Vietnam, you had the LRP patrol, not LARP, but LRP, LRRP. That's the long-range reconnaissance patrols in Vietnam. Those guys would go in with very little gear, and their whole job was recon. So they utilized stealth, and they were very close proximity to to the Viet Cong in a lot of instances. And while they did carry silenced weapons on them, they also carried bows. And the reason is, if you've ever shot a silenced, well, silence is not really the best word to use. I would say suppressed. If you've ever shot a suppressed weapon, it kind of sounds a little bit like tin cans. You know, it's quiet, but you can still hear a noise. Well, a lot of times in this quiet jungle, these guys, they would get in very close proximity to the Viet Cong, and if you shot them with a silenced pistol, you would alert the other people around you. So they used the bow and arrow, and the bow was completely silenced. No sound at all. So they could take a guy down with the bow and not have to worry about any sort of muzzle flash. They wouldn't have to worry about any sort of sound. You hit them in the right spot, you can bring them down instantly. So that was what these guys did. I think I've heard that this is where they got the concept of Rambo using the bow in the movies there, but I'm not sure there. But a lot of these guys, they didn't have any help. So if they were seen or they were heard, they were probably all going to be killed. So they had to utilize stealth, and they had to utilize very quiet weapons. Also, flaming arrows were used in Vietnam. There's several pictures of, I've got some pictures of guys using flaming arrows from some of the boats on some of the river rats, using them on the boats to burn up huts and stuff that some of the Viet Cong were in. Plus, I've got pictures of one of the recon units there, all standing there with their bows that they carried into the field. So it's a very cool story. And it's almost like, for modern uses, it's almost like this was done. I almost feel like this was done for me. But just this week, they had an instance in Africa where the Boko Haram terrorist organization there, they had a lady who was a female suicide bomber, had the vest strapped to her, and they have local militia groups that are helping out trying to stop the Boko Haram who's just terrorizing the area. One of the guys on the local militia group, he didn't have a gun, he had a bow. He took that bow. This lady was about to detonate her vest. He took that bow, shot an arrow, and killed this lady dead with one shot before she could set off that vest. Amazing story. Just absolutely amazing. Just happened this week, and that is the power the bow has. The weapon has not changed. It does the exact same thing it used to. Our mentality has changed. And there's different ideas and concepts that have to be used in order to really make this idea of modern combat archery effective. And we're going to talk about some of those right here. We're going to talk about the ideas and the concepts behind our modern combat archery program. So the first thing, and I've got these listed in as three different sets of things. We have three basically pillars of modern combat archery. And I have them in order from greatest to least. So this first thing I'm going to be saying is the most important thing. And that thing is mindset. And you're going to find that mindset is a universal. Mindset is going to extend to anything you do, combatively especially, whether it be firearms, martial arts, anything like that. Mindset is always going to be the most important thing, because if your mind is not ready for the fight, there's no fight to be had. You're not in it. Any type of competitions I've ever competed in that I've lost, I always kind of knew I was going to lose before it even started. My mind just was not there. I wasn't ready. And mindset is something that I wish I had learned a long time ago, just really focused on. I had somebody to really coach me in that manner. I wish it was as it is now. My mindset has gotten much stronger over the years. But what is the mindset of the modern combat archer? To really break it down, I always tell people that the modern combat archer should think of themselves as the ghost of the battlefield. That ability to appear out of nowhere and then disappear back into darkness or into the woods, camo, whatever. That ability to strike and then disappear. That's the idea. Almost you want to have this idea of a specter of the field where you almost create this fear in other people, where all of a sudden they're walking along, a guy gets hit with an arrow, where the hell did it come from? Case in point, whenever we've worked like force-on-force drills with this, we'll have a group of people. You can have them armed with paintball, simunition, whatever. Have them walking along, and they'll be in a group, they're moving good, and the archer is somewhere out there on the field. And all of a sudden, as the group is walking, bam, one of their guys, out of nowhere, gets popped with an arrow. Blunt tip, of course. They get popped with an arrow. And you just watch the group of people. You see that psychological battle hit. Because all of a sudden, one of their guys is dead. He got hit with an arrow. You didn't hear it. You didn't hear a pop. You didn't hear nothing. The only sound you heard was the arrow hitting him. You have no idea where it come from. You didn't see a muzzle flash. Nothing happened. It's almost like it's like death is out there waiting. Instead of death wielding a sickle, he's wielding a bow and arrow. And that arrow comes out of nowhere, and you see everybody scrambling. They're trying to find cover. They don't know where to go because they don't know. It's like, where do I take cover at? Well, I don't know where that shot come from. And that's just with one archer. When you start working in a team and start utilizing team concepts, then it really gets interesting to where you really create this idea of fear in the people. And there's a psychological battle that goes on. Once that arrow flies, and you may hear, all they may hear is a right at the last minute, then it hits. And when you start talking ranges of 60 yards and beyond, when you shoot and you've got about a 1 second reload and shoot again, the arrows will hit pretty much like boom, boom, just like that. So you can drop 2 people out of nowhere, and it almost creates this impression that there's more than one person. So this is that psychological battle. And I tell guys, if you really want to embrace the mindset of the modern combat archer, you have to be willing to really accept death. Accept your death, accept the death that you're getting ready to deal. Because once you step out there, you become a hunter of man. You're hunting the most dangerous game, that is man. And you develop this mindset, the same mentality of the hunter. You develop this understanding of anatomy, and you understand where you want your shot to go, and what's going to happen when you put the arrow here, what it's going to do to their body, the physiological effects that's going to go into that. And granted, we don't have a lot of data as far as human reaction, but we can gather a good bit of data from the animals that have been hunted. So we know that the human being is not going to react exactly the same as the animal. The animal is going to react with a flight, and we see about how far. Usually, if you pop a deer or something with an arrow straight through the heart, you get a through and through shot. That deer takes off about 20 yards, he falls. 20, 30 yards, he falls, and that's how fast a deer can run. Now you factor that in for a human being, he's probably not going to run very far. He might not run at all, depending on where you hit. We'll talk about that later. So number 2 on list of important pillars is skills. That seems pretty self-explanatory. But one of the things that we focus on, these different skills, we have these skills divided up. Number 1 skill is accuracy. Accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. I know that my kids, if my homeschool kids that I work with archery are listening to this, they're probably like, oh my God, they can hear me screaming accuracy at them all the time. Because I'm going to say this, and they probably know what I'm going to say, and they're repeating it right now. I do not care how fast you can miss. It does not matter to me. If you miss, it does no good. Plus, you've given away that element of surprise. Accuracy is by far the most important thing, and it is something that is a perishable skill. Even in firearms, it's a perishable skill. You have to work on accuracy. Accuracy over speed. That is the most important thing, and you have to develop a combative accuracy. You think about it, the average human heart is about the size of a fist. So can you shoot fist-sized groups at long range? Can you hit something the size of a fist at 50 yards? If you can't, you have to work on it. You have to know what level of proficiency you have with that bow. We focus on specific targeting in combat archery. We're looking for what I like to call the Trinity shot. If you can get that side shot going through both lungs and heart, that's a great shot. You're looking for anything down that center line, and you also have to understand the idea exactly of what exactly an arrow will do. It's not like the movies where you get hit with an arrow and you go, I am hit with an arrow, let me pull it out, and you pull it out and you keep going. That's not the reality of the situation. Just as the same as when somebody gets shot, they don't fly through the air like they do in the movies. It's the same with arrows. You don't just pull it out and keep going. A lot of times there's not going to be anything to pull out because the arrow is going to achieve a through and through. This happens on large animals. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen massive elk get hit in the side with an arrow and it go right out the other side of them. And when this happens, basically it creates a water hose. If you can picture, when you get hit, that you put a water hose the size about an inch in diameter, you have a water hose sticking out of your body that shoots blood out. That's basically what it looks like when you get hit with an arrow. There's tons of videos to back this up. Plus, we also like to focus on different structural targets as well, such as I like those center mass and back shots going down the center line, because a lot of times, even though I'm trying to achieve a loss of blood pressure, I'm also trying to achieve a spinal hit, which is very likely to happen with an arrow. When I hit a spinal hit, what happens? That shuts off all communication to the rest of the body. If you've ever seen a deer get shot in the spine with an arrow, you'll see the deer immediately hit the ground, and he's trying to move, but he can't. He may be able to move his head. He may even be able to move his front legs, but it's also going to depend on where you hit on the spine. But that deer cannot move, and he's dying. He just doesn't realize it yet. It's almost like he's received an epidural. There's no pain. It looks terrible for people who don't know anything about anatomy. It looks terrible, but once that shot is hit, he's not feeling anything anymore. So that's the idea. If we're thinking about guns now, if we're thinking about this idea of a bow versus a gun, if I make that center mass shot, which I trained myself to do, and I get that shot all the way to the spine and pierce the spine, guess what? Boom, they go down. It's a single shot hit and kill, and that stops the threat. Especially when you start talking about a little higher and you start aiming around neck areas. I've seen tests done with dummies, and you can actually pull off a decap by severing the spine completely on those anatomy dummies that they have, where they have ballistic gel and everything, where it's exactly, the bones and everything are just like a human being. You can actually get a decap on something like that. Absolutely horrendous, but you can do it. There's not a lot to pass through up there. So that's a lot of times the type of accuracy we're looking for. There are certain spots that we may be aiming for, and I tend to find that a lot of times, especially when we force train, I find that a lot of people end up getting hit around the groin and hip area. Of course, you got your femoral there, plus you got that descending abdominal aorta in that range as well. Massive bleeding that's going to occur. Plus, it's a good way to stop the target as well, especially with an arrow sticking out of your hip. Or as I think I've been seeing the T-shirt going around with Craig Douglas, you can't put a tourniquet on a taint. And if you drive an arrow all the way through there, all the way through the hip and groin area, there's not going to be any sort of tourniquet you're going to be able to apply in such a situation. We focus also in the skill sets, we focus on a consistent reload with any arrow or any bow. And this is another realm of contention that I have with a lot of the world of combative archery. A lot of these guys do things like they'll hold the arrows in the hand and they'll pull them out, and then they'll go between the bow and the string and reload. And I'm thinking, as soon as I see that, I say, well, these guys have never tested any of this in any sort of force-on-force. And the reason being is if you do that with a sharp arrow or broadhead, you're probably going to put it through your hand because the arrow is going to be bouncing all over the place while you're running or trying to take cover. You're not just going to stand there and do that. Plus, you're trying to pull them out of your hand, everything. And I have known guys who have actually cut their string in half while trying to do that with a broadhead. So you can't just say, well, I can do this with field tips. You can do anything with a field tip. You add broadheads into the mix, which is going to be typically what you're going to find yourself using in a combative type of situation. You don't want to have this try and reload fast in between there and stab yourself through the hand. It does you no good. Plus, you don't want to have a reload that can only be done on maybe, say, one of my assassin bows at Odinson Archery. You don't want a reload that you can do on that, but you can't do on a compound bow, because we do utilize those bows as well. So it has to be a reload that can be done with any bow, and it has to be consistent. You don't want to learn 10 different reloads, so you have to decide on what to do. Consistency is key, and if you do it consistently, that will create, once you get under stress, that will create a response to where you have the correct response rather than an incorrect response. As I said before, we also like to focus a little more on long range as opposed to short range. Now, we do short range work as well, but it requires a certain level of concealment and It's basically when things have gone really bad. And short-range work is typically only used with a team, so we can basically get kind of the shock and awe approach. We'll utilize things such as smoke and other distractions that will give us the ability to maybe negate some of the advantage that the firearm user is going to have. But typically we like to engage things at long range. As I said before, this is because it's much easier for us to not be hit at longer range. So we also utilize stealth and camouflage. There's a lot of different camouflage that can be used out there. I like the ASAT camo, ASAT camouflage. Works very well in a variety of different settings, and that it's pretty much universal. But if you watch a lot of bow hunters, they got some of the best camo in the world. It's because typically we let our targets get at a lot closer ranges than the firearms user would. So definitely utilizing that stealth, being able to move quiet, being able to attack from different angles, that's very important. As far as, we tend to focus a lot on instinctive shooting as opposed to sighted shooting. And the reason being is if you watch guys focus on sights, they get really caught up in really making that perfect bullseye with the sight. And don't get me wrong, that's important. As I said, accuracy is very important. But with the instinctive shot, you develop more of a wide view of the terrain and what you have to fight. You don't get focused in on this little teeny pin while you're looking through a peep. So I like instinctive shooting. It takes a little longer to master, but once you get good at instinctive shooting, it will translate over to a lot of things. A video I shot for Aries Tactical Solutions entitled Ghost of the Battlefield, you see me shooting in a lot of different terrain. You see me shooting in complete darkness because I can see the target. As long as I can see my target, I can make a shot. I don't have to be able to see a sight pin. I can shoot through brush because I don't have to be able to see a sight pin. I can see all around. I get a wide view of what I'm trying to hit. Granted, like I said, it does take a little more work, but that's part of the mastery that comes with archery. Your sighted versus your instinctive, I kind of always view it as kind of your red dots or reflex sights on firearms versus iron sights. It's good to learn iron sights before you learn red dots. That's just, some people would disagree, but that's my personal opinion on that. That's why I say it's good to learn instinctive before you learn sighted. And you need to learn all these because what happens if your sight system gets damaged and you still have to shoot? Well, if you can't shoot instinctive, you're shit out of luck. Now you've got a bow that you basically can't aim. So if I know instinctive, I can pop those sights off. Some of the things I've done in my classes with guys that show up with sights, I'll let them shoot, and they're shooting pretty good. And I say, okay, take your sights off. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, take your sight off. We're going to shoot instinctive now. And it completely throws them for a loop because they've never done that before. They start finding that the arrow rest they have, maybe they got a whisker biscuit on there, their arrow rest that doesn't even support the ability to shoot instinctive. That's something else they got to pick up. So it's an important skill to have. As far as it's important to learn different types of releases in this skill set world. It's important to learn different types of releases. The Mediterranean or three-finger release is important to learn. That's the primary one we're going to use for accurate long-range shots. It enables you to use heavier draw weight bows, and it's very important. I'm not a fan of trigger releases, even though you will see me use a trigger release on my compound bow at times. Trigger releases are great for precision shots that need to be made at long range, where you can relax and you just you just mash that button and it goes. I always tell people if I'm going to pull a trigger, I tend to want to do it on a gun rather than a bow. But it does add for a clean release, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of archery. So sometimes if I'm working at extreme long ranges of 70 to 100 yards, you'll see me use a trigger release just to keep everything very stable. But as far as combative use, you won't see me use a trigger release. I'll always use three fingers just because of the dexterity, and plus if I'm moving, it's very difficult for me to click that trigger release onto the string itself. Alright guys, due to time constraint, we had to cut this episode a little short, but if you'd like to hear the talk continue, please check out and download this episode at our website, thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com. You can hear the talk in its entirety and learn more about modern combat archery. This is Alan Odinson, and the Barbarian Lounge is closed.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the